Okay, so I'm Caleb Jackson, a software engineer at a software consulting company called Tandem, based out of Chicago. And today I want to talk to you about how developers best mentor early career developers. So for today's agenda, I want to give two disclaimers and then talk through my experience and highlight cultivating trust and practicing learning and experimentation, then wrap up with some key takeaways. So for my disclaimers, it should come as no surprise that my experience doesn't apply to everyone. So your mentorship techniques should be tailored to your mentoring relationships. And also, you don't necessarily need to hold the role or title of mentor to use these tips, because most people in this field like guide others in some capacity. So I hope whether you're officially a mentor or not, you can learn something from this talk. So to begin, my journey started by going to a conference called Lesbians Who Tech. And as a queer and trans non-binary person, I thought this was a great first conference to go to. And it was. At that conference, I learned so much, but I was surprised to learn about DeepMind, which introduced me to the intersection of science and software engineering. And upon further exploration, I got very interested in this field. I began learning about open science and numerous ways that software helps to support scientific research. And as you might imagine, this led to many tabs and feelings of overwhelm. Initially, I felt like having lots of options was a good thing. It meant I could choose to get involved in whatever I wanted. But still, there was a point when I felt like I was in over my head. And I felt pretty vulnerable admitting to not knowing where to begin or who to talk to or how to navigate through all of these ideas. And that's when mentorship came in. Mentorship provided me with a bunch of things like support, goal setting, advice, and especially direction. I was mentored by one of my coworkers, the tech lead on the project I was staffed on. And it was pretty informal, though our company has a mentorship program that runs for about 6 months, twice a year. It started with me talking about my interests in biology and software engineering. And I think she could like just sort of tell from the times I would screen share or anytime I talked about open source projects that I didn't know where to begin. And because we were staffed on the same project, I had a hard time like letting my guard down and fear of her finding out that I didn't know everything. So she was the tech lead on the project, and at some point she offered to be my accountability partner and sync with me weekly. And we called these things check-ins. And during our check-ins, we initially would talk about my career goals and interests, both like work-related and non-work related. And from those conversations, we came up with tasks for me to complete before our next check-in. So that was the mentorship dynamic I experienced. But one of the questions I think is worth discussing is the concept of cultivating trust. When learning about mentorship, you'll likely come across a bunch of different metaphors. And yes, I'm going to highlight one too. On the left, you'll see a sculptor working on a, on the left, you'll see a sculptor working on a sculpture, and being mentored by a sculptor doesn't really work for me. Sculptors tend to mold you into what they think you should be. For example, my mentor could have guided me towards becoming a better software consultant, which would have made sense because that's the work we do daily anyways, right? But on the right, you'll see a gardener. And I think my mentor took on more of the role of a gardener. She created a space, a virtual space, in fact, that encouraged growth, valued communication, and gave me a sense of belonging. And I think trust was built by her approach to mentoring. For example, she'd share some of her early career stories with me. She was also always open to questions, even DMs on Slack. Then one piece of advice I give to mentees is to openly ask or send your questions. I can definitely relate to feeling like I should already know this or this is so obvious, but sometimes it's really not. You might be shedding light on ambiguity within documentation, and it's completely understandable that you don't know everything. And asking those questions will likely lead to you learning how to solve or look for solutions yourself next time. Now, with this in mind, like I said, my mentor was also always open to questions, including via Slack. And I recognized that she was open to questions because if she was overwhelmed by them, I never knew of it. So that brings me to my next point of setting expectations. It'd be best to do this during your initial meeting. Now, admittedly, our first meeting wasn't very formal because we had already built a level of rapport from working together on work-related projects. And our projects at work usually began with project kickoff meetings where we'd share our personal guides to one another. And these meetings seem awkward or like somewhat unnecessary to me initially, but I think they're pretty valuable in getting to know your team. These questions specifically highlighted in the blue box would be great starter questions between mentees and mentors. How do I most comfortably communicate with others? Am I cool with impromptu calls? What qualities do I particularly value in the people I work with? What makes me grumpy at work? How will my team know if I'm grumpy? Now, of course, these should be tweaked a little to fit more of like a conversation between a mentee and a mentor. So you might say like, how will I know if you're grumpy at work or something like that? Now, I must add as well that mentees, this might be your first time thinking about questions like this, which is okay. Plus, the answer to these questions might change over time, right? I especially noticed that within myself. But what also helped me with building trust was the main thing that did stand out to me during our first meeting. My mentor just seemed just as curious and as excited as I was about my interests. Then during our check-ins, she would phrase questions like, how does that sound? Or do these tasks sound doable? Which made her seem open and understanding. Now, of course, I would often say, I can do this. Then the following week, not actually have those tasks completed, right? And my mentor could probably tell that I bit off more than I could chew, but allowed me to see that for myself, which is really important. And she reminded me that there's not really a rush, like whatever pressure I felt was self-imposed. And those learning moments tie into this next part of practicing learning and experimentation. Like I said before, I was pretty overwhelmed with all the options out there for me to get involved. And mentorship especially provided me with a sense of direction. One practical artifact that came from mentorship was putting all my ideas into a document and then dwindling down which projects interested me the most or seemed most doable. For example, I weighed the pros and cons and found lab.js to be really cool, but it didn't involve much coding, so that didn't really work for me. So I decided to learn more about JSPsych, which is a JavaScript framework for building behavioral experiments online. Now, why does all this matter? Remember again, I started with feeling overwhelmed by my options, and having a mentor that I trusted and who encouraged experimentation gave me more confidence in my JavaScript skills and my ability to get things done. I remember, for example, after digging into JSPsych and building 2 or 3 practice projects from the documentation, I decided I wanted to use JSPsych to build a shoot task experiment. And even after building it, I came back the following week feeling like I didn't accomplish enough. Because I realized in order to save the data from my experiment I built, I needed to learn some other tool called cognition. But my mentor reminded me that I took an idea or an interest and created something from it, which is worth celebrating. And having a mentor helped to remind me of those achievements when I couldn't quite see them for myself. And to wrap up with some key takeaways, just as a reminder, my story doesn't apply to everyone, right? And this talk didn't discuss mentorship programs because I think informal mentoring is really effective as well. And on the right, you'll see a word cloud with qualities of a good mentor in the shape of a plant to remind you to take on the role of a gardener. And when it comes to mentorship, to take on the role of a gardener when it comes to mentorship. But on the left are a few points that I wanted to highlight the most because of the impact they had on me. If my mentor wasn't initially observant, I doubt she would have reached out to me and asked to mentor me. And I probably wouldn't have reached out to her for help either. I'm not really sure. And I think our weekly check-ins played a key role in building trust. As I mentioned, I really appreciated when she shared her early career stories and how she was never visibly like flustered with all my questions. And if you know too many questions might overwhelm you as a mentor, that's why the setting expectations part is so important. Lastly, celebrate mentees' accomplishments, no matter how small, because reassurance really helps with confidence building. So
thank you so much. Oh,
that's my
sorry.
time. I think, yeah. I think next is like the Q&A portion.
Thank you very much for a great talk. So yeah, I see a hand up. Oh, I see clapping. Okay. This was not raising hands for questions, but yeah, please ask questions or put it in the chat. So many thanks for your personal experience there. You know, that is really that is very valuable to see that. Yeah. So did you get feedback also from, let's say, managers or other managers, or, you know, giving your opinion about this?
Yeah, so or like for this talk specifically, or during like my mentorship?
Oh, when you talk about this topic, because you seem to, you know, be really engaged in making mentorship better.
Yeah, for sure. My managers were pretty like supportive throughout all of this. Even though I feel like, of course, like, you know, at work you should focus on, you know, completing tickets and all that. But again, that like taking on the role of a gardener and not like pushing me to be like a better, like pushing me to just be better at this job. I feel like that was like really, really important, because I felt really open and like safe to explore my own interests. So yeah.
Fantastic.
I think Jamie has a question.
Yes. Me?
Yeah, I'm going to throw a question. So first of all, thank you for the talk. I think that mentorship is critical, but there are many buts. So first of all, it's time consuming, and it needs skills and also personality. I've seen some people that are very good with some mentoring some people, but terrible with some other people. So can you provide any idea how to balance these things?
Yeah. The first thing that comes to mind is like that piece of sharing early career stories, or like sharing your stories with your mentees, right? And having mentees share their stories as well. Because I feel like that will build up like a level of like rapport and like trust among the mentee and mentor, as well as just like, I don't know, like sharing interests. Because whenever you feel more comfortable with the person, I think that helps with the relationship a lot. And even if you are like kind of an awkward mentor, that could be like your, you know, clerk or whatever, and your mentee could be more understanding of that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Awesome. I
So
really appreciate
there is also comments, so those discussions can also help you decide if someone should or should not be your mentor. Exactly.
Yeah.
I would agree to that. I was part of a program, for example, where it was like, you know, bringing the two groups of mentors and mentees together, and then people could discuss through a duration of 2 hours. That worked well for people finding maybe more suitable mentors for themselves.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Yeah, I really appreciate the keynote speaker's talk, and like the piece where he was talking about like going to the places where there's underrepresented folks, because like that's sort of like what I experienced as well, with, you know, being raised a Boys and Girls Club kid, and things like that. So